So my name is Orin Courtenay. I'm an Associate Professor at the University of Warwick in the UK. So leishmaniasis and the liver viruses are not well known amongst the public. There's the vectors, it's a vector-borne disease. The vectors are very small. You're familiar with mosquitoes, but they're much, much smaller than mosquitoes. And so people don't really have a good understanding of the disease or the transmission cycle. So as I said, it's a vector-borne disease, and the principal species of leishmania, for example, that we have in Europe, has a reservoir in domestic dogs. And so there's a transmission cycle between dogs and sandflies, and that can spill over into humans. So, the first part of understanding the issue is sort of education of the public in terms of, what the actual transmission cycle, raise awareness for people to understand that the consequences of being infected, either as a human or as a dog, are pretty serious. So the treatments are not necessarily 100% effective. They're also very costly. And so it's very important to understand that there are issues with not paying attention to the basic biology of the disease and its transmission, but also the consequences and how we deal with it. So prevention is always better than cure, particularly in this case. You've all heard of climate change, and you may have heard of vector-borne diseases such as dengue, such as Western Nile virus, chikungunya, Zika, but you may not have understood how climate change can affect vectors of diseases. Now we know that, and you will have seen, and you'll be very aware that vector populations or insect populations, they rise and fall with the season. So in the winter when it's cold, you don't see a lot of insects, but in the summer you do. And it's the same with these vector species. So what the climate change can affect is the geographical distribution of the vectors, so that it can expand them into areas that were otherwise vector-free. But they can also change the transmission rates in areas where they already exist. So because the climate affects the biological development of these pathogens within the sandfly vector, you can have actually an increase in transmission if you have a change in climate. So those two things have to be recognized. And so vigilance is clearly really important, so that you can identify when and where these things, transmission may occur. And that's particularly relevant in areas where it's not currently endemic, or in areas where the numbers of cases are so low that you don't really notice them. Because in those areas, the medical profession, the clinicians, the public health workers and the public are not trained, or they're not knowledgeable about the actual clinical symptoms of the disease. So clearly there's an important aspect of training, the professionals as well. And in many parts of the world where I have worked, where the leishmaniasis occurs, the medical profession, the clinicians are not really aware at all of leishmaniasis until they're trained. The CLIMOS project that I'm involved in with many other partners across Europe, Turkey and Israel, is to come up with what we call an early warning system, by which we will intend to measure the changes in abundance of sandflies, the vectors, and also changes perhaps in the infection rates in dogs, because they're the reservoir for the disease that we're talking about in Europe, or the species causing that disease. And ideally, we would also look at the infection rates in the sandflies that are caught. That's called xenomonitoring. At the moment, we're developing a trap that will catch sandflies more effectively than the current monitoring tool. With that data, we're monitoring also the climate in the areas that we're trapping, and that trapping is taking place across many, many countries of Europe in many different locations, in high altitude, low altitude, high temperature, low temperature, etc. locations. So we'll have a longitudinal data set of the sandfly abundance, and the mathematical modelers in our group will be able to model the climate and climate changes in relation to changes in the sandfly abundance. So far we know that the sandfly's geographical range in Europe is expanding into colder climates, and to higher altitudes. So there's no sort of reason why it wouldn't continue if the temperature keeps rising. But essentially, monitoring changes in climate and relating that to changes in sandfly abundance and infection rates is really what CLIMOS is about.